Your game already has a great gameplay mechanic, but there is still one problem: it lacks a challenge. We'll go through an amazing journey to add enemies, health system, double jump and more to power up your game experience. A treasure awaits you at the finish line. Ready to start? Let's dive in and begin here with Health UI preparation. I have an idea to permanently show 3 heart symbols that will represent player health points. To do that, first open any of your level scenes. You should already have a canvas layer. This is a UI node that sits on top of your game elements. Here we'll add a new panel node. This will be a container for our hearts. I will resize it a bit and move it here. To make sure that it always sticks to the top right hand corner, click Anchor Presets and select Top Right. Now time for the hearts. Unfortunately, the Pixel Adventure Graphics package doesn't have any kind of heart symbol, but I found this one online and imported it to our project file system. I will create a new child node called TextureRect. This is an image container. To assign a heart, just drag an image from the file system here, and to make it pixel perfect, change the texture filter to nearest. Rename it to heart and the parent to hearts. Now I want to have 3 health points, so let's duplicate this image 2 times and place them next to each other. I'm not very great at placing images in a straight line, but the good news is that there is a component that will help us out with that. It's called Horizontal Box Container. It takes all of its children and ties them up in the horizontal line. To apply it, select our 3 images, right-click and go with the Reparent to New node. Here, search for Box Container and select this one. That created a parent that groups our hearts and properly aligns them. To make it a bit more appealing, I will first change its alignment to center, then select all of the heart images and change their expand mode to fit with. Now everything is nicely aligned based on the box container dimensions. Also, one other small benefit: if you hide any of the hearts using this eye symbol, all the others will automatically change their position. If you don't like this behavior, you can just change the alignment to the left. Perfect! Congrats on your first milestone. We'll get back to the hearts logic a bit later. Time for the enemies. The idea is that they will stand on the platforms, and once the player touches them, we lose 1 heart. First, we need to create their graphics. I will be using once again the Pixel Adventure Graphics pack, but this time the 2nd edition. It contains a bunch of different enemy graphics. I think that this one, a mushroom, will be an ideal for our game. Let's import it to Godot. Now I need to create a new animated sprite that will stand somewhere here on the scene. Because that will be a physics object that can detect collisions, let's first create a rigid body 2D node. Rigid body needs to have 2 children, animated sprite and a collider. Do you remember how to create those from the previous videos? Try it out yourself. Alright, a quick recap. Create a new child node called Animated Sprite 2D. Then here, click Animation, Empty New Sprite Frames. Click to edit, and in the bottom Sprite Frames interface, click Add Frames from Sprite Sheet. Select Mushroom, Idle. Here we need to properly split all the frames, in this case 14 horizontal and 1 vertical, and then select all to create an animation. Change frame rate to 20, enable autoplay on load, very important, and click play to preview it. To make it look properly, I will change texture filter to nearest and make it a bit bigger. The last bit is to create a collider. Create a new node under rigid body called Collision Shape 2D, change shape to rectangle and make sure it fits the entire sprite. Alright, to move it and place it anywhere on the scene, first we need to create a subscene out of it, right click on rigid body and rename it to enemy. Then right click again and select Save Branch as Scene. I will put it in the Scenes folder. Great! Now on the level 1 scene, I can remove rigid body we've just been working on and place multiple enemies on the scene. Because I want to keep everything tidy, I will also select all of the enemies in the hierarchy and reparent them to the new node, of a type node, the most basic one. Call it enemies and drag it to the scene objects. That way we have a nice structure and also our enemies appear when playing the game. Everything works so far? Click that like button under the video. That way we travel to the next milestone on our path. We'll get back to the enemies shortly. Before that, let's introduce another challenging mechanic. I want to create holes in the ground where our character can fall into. Falling won't take hearts into consideration, it will immediately restart the level. To create this mechanic, you can use the existing levels created in the previous videos, but here I've created a new level 3 scene. As you can see, it clearly has a few challenging places where our main character can fall. To detect if a player has fallen through the ground, we need to create a new area, the same type of node we use with collectibles. Carefully move it somewhere here below the ground. Area requires a collider child to know where to trigger events, so create one, collision shape 2D. Then when it comes to the shape, we have a few options here. I have a small challenge for you. Pause this video for a second and find which shape in your opinion will be the best. Okay, you're already familiar with the rectangle shape, which you could in theory resize like that, but in my opinion it doesn't make sense in this case since the player can only enter from one direction. So instead we can use a segmented shape, which is basically a line that will detect if anything enters it. Downside of using this option is that whenever you want to rebuild your level, you also need to remember to resize it. Here comes a third option, word boundary shape. It is technically still a line, but you set its position and rotation once, and if anything crosses its infinite line in either direction, a collision is detected. That is exactly what we need here. Make sure that this shorter line faces up, as this is an indicator where collisions will come from. Now, how to detect if the player has entered this area? That's pretty simple, we've already done it with the collectibles. When you click on the Node Signals tab, you can see a signal called Body Entered. That way, we can detect that the player character has touched it and we should perform an action. To use them, let's first create a script, right-click on Area and select Attach Script. Name it Fall Area. Go back to the scene, click once again on the area and in the Node tab, double-click on the Body Entered signal. Find our area 2D and connect it. That generated this method that is triggered whenever something touches it. To test it out, I can type print touched body.name. As you can see, now when our character falls, we get a touched message in the console. Just as with the collectibles, I will now check if entered body is for sure player, type if body.name = character body 2D, then get tree.reload current scene, which will reset the scene. Please remember that as with all the coding in Godot, you need to make sure that your code has the exact same indents as mine. Use the tab key on your keyboard to add them. Now when I play the game, you can see a working level mechanic. Great job! Before we continue with implementing enemies logic, we need to spend just a minute on organizing our folder structure. As you can see, we have a total mess here with scenes and graphics. There are multiple ways to organize it. Remember that by the end, it should match your coding and designing style. Here is my suggestion. I will have two top-level folders, existing scenes folder and the new assets folder. In scenes, let's add three categories: levels for level scenes and game manager script, menu for main menu, and game objects for all in-game elements like collectibles. By putting GD files and scenes next to each other, we can more easily find files related to the same context. Very important here, if you hard-coded any of the scene paths, like here in the main menu script, they won't work. Please replace them, in this case, to scenes levels. Then in the assets folder, I will put all the graphics split into multiple categories: background, terrain, character, game elements, and finally menu for our logo graphic. You can get rid of the Godot icon as we are not using it in our project. That's it. We may have spent a second on organizing our files, but trust me, it will save a lot of time later on once our project will grow bigger. Time to get back to the enemies. So far they only stand here and nothing happens when we touch them. I want to add two mechanics. If you touch such an enemy from the side, the player should be hit, but if we jump on it, we'll destroy the enemy like in the Mario games. Let's open our enemy scene. You may remember that we already have a collision shape under rigid body 2D. This collision shape is used to define character boundaries when colliding with the platform and with the player. Unfortunately, it doesn't provide an easy way to detect in the script the moment when we collide with the player, so for that we'll again use our old friend Area2D with another collision parent. I will make an area a bit bigger than the sprite itself. To use this area in code, let's add a new script to our enemy. Now a quick task for you. Connect a signal coming from Area2D with the script to detect when the player is colliding with the enemy. We've done it already multiple times. In Area2D, signals, double-click on body entered and connect our main script. To make sure we are colliding with the player, add if body.name double equals character body 2D. Great! Now we need to perform a check if our character is next to the enemy or above it. The simplest way to do it will be to check positions of both the enemy and the player. If the player is above the certain threshold at the moment of collision, we'll know that we are jumping on top of the mushroom. If not, that probably means that the player failed. Let's create a variable y delta equals enemy y position minus player y position, and then print it out. That way we can now test the values in our game. If I touch the enemy from the side, it's a low value, something around 5, but if I touch it from above, the value is around 60. Thanks to that knowledge, we can now create an if statement. If y delta is greater than 30, then print destroy enemy, else print decrease player health. You can test if the proper text shows up in the console when either approaching the enemy from the side or when jumping on it. Now time to implement enemy kill. Type QE3 to remove node. I would also like the player to bounce jump when killing, so let's go back to the main character script and create a new function called jump that will just set the character velocity upwards. To call it inside the enemy script, simply type body.jump. Regarding the case where a player fails, let's implement this very primitive logic of removing the player. We'll implement health decreasing logic later on. That's all. Now we can bounce off the enemies, but when we fail, our player disappears. Great job! We'll finish off this mechanic when working on the health system very soon, but until then I would like to get back to the system that is currently missing from our game, and that is pause system. That's right, I would like to implement a simple pause menu that will allow our players to click escape and freeze the gameplay if needed. Let's start with the design. Pause menu will be placed on top of whatever is happening on the scene. Because of that, it needs to be implemented as a new child of canvas layer. For now, let's go with the basic empty node. I will call it pause. Inside of it, I will create the UI part, a new panel node. Call it pause panel. This panel will cover the entire screen, so we can use this full rect anchor preset. Now time to refresh your designing skills. Please experiment with the pause menu design. Add text and two buttons. to resume the game and to go back to the main menu. Alright, let's quickly build it. I will add a new label, place it in the center and set its text to game paused. In the theme overrides, I will also change the font size. Then the buttons. For them, I will use the newly introduced box container, this time the vertical one. It will be used to properly align our buttons. Talking about buttons, let's create one to resume the game, with a bit bigger font size, and then the second one for going back to the main menu. If you want to get fancy, check out my other video where I go in depth into some more advanced UI styling like rounded corners and changing the padding. To increase spacing between those buttons, click on the vertical box container and in the theme overrides, increase the separation. Alright, that looks fine. Don't forget to check how it looks in the game view. At the end, hide the pause panel so that it won't be visible at the start. Now time to add the pause logic. Add a new script to the pause node. To have an information if player is pressing the escape key, type verbal escape pressed equals input that is action just pressed pause. You might remember that in the first episode we configured the input methods for left, right and jump. Now we also need to do that for the pause action. Go to Project, Project Settings, Input Map tab, and here create a new action called Pause that listens for the escape key. If you're creating a game for the controller, you can also add joypad button 6. This pause action is the same one we referenced in the script. Then create an if statement. If escape press, then we want to perform two actions. Pause the game. To do that, type get3.paused equals true, and we want to show our pause menu. To reference it, right-click on Pause panel, select Reference as unique name, and then drag it to the script, but just before letting it go, hold the Control or Command key. Then use this reference by typing pause panel.show. Great! Let's test it all out. In the game, press Escape, and it works. The pause UI is shown and the game in the background is completely frozen. Time to quickly attach those two buttons. Click on the Resume node. In the Node Signals tab, double-click on the pressed signal and connect it with the pause script. Do the same with the main menu. When we unpause the game, we want to do an opposite of that. Hide the pause panel and resume the game. For the main menu button, let's also first unpause the game and then use this line to navigate to the main menu scene. Perfect! Launch the game, press Escape to pause, then click Resume button and it doesn't work? Why? Well, this is a fun issue. The buttons won't work because the game is paused. To ignore the paused state, select your buttons and in the inspector find Process, Mode, Always. Now everything works as expected. That is almost the end of our journey. We are very close to the treasure. We still need to finish our live system and connect it with the player fails. Let's start with some logic. You may remember our game manager script. Open it. So far it only counted points, but we can now use it also for counting hearts. I will create a new variable, lives, that equals 3. Then time for our new function called decrease health. Inside of it, we'll decrease lives by 1, print out the current lives values, and create a simple check. If lives double equals 0, then reload our scene. Now we need to call this function from the enemy script when the player fails. From the collectible script, we can copy this line and also reference the game manager in the enemy script. Then here we should decrease player health. Type game manager.decrease health. That should already work. Whenever you touch the mushroom, the heart decreases and on third try you restart the level. Let's work on those hearts display. In game manager script at the top, type export var hearts array of a type node. After saving, you should now see on the scene in the inspector this hearts array. Just click on it, change its size to 3 and assign all the hearts one by one. Now we can access them in the script, and here in the decrease health function I will paste this loop. What it does is that we go through each heart one by one and check if we have enough life points to display it. If yes, show heart, if not, hide it. With this simple logic we now have a dynamic display of the player hearts. And the very last thing, notice that when our players enters the enemy, it just stays in place without any visual representation of that image. Let's change that. First I thought about calling jump on failing, but that didn't make any sense. But then I thought of an alternative option. How about also jumping, but away from the danger? In main character script, let's create one more function, this time called jump slide. It will also perform a jump, but additionally will take x as an input and will add x velocity in that direction. In the enemy script, let's calculate x delta as body.position.x minus position.x, then we can use it for this if statement. If x delta is greater than 0, then body jump side 500, otherwise body jump side minus 500. And that's it. Run the game, touch the enemy, and notice how our player jumps off. Also, after all of the hearts are used, the level restarts. That's it! You did an amazing job! We reached the treasure together, and the reward is more free Godot content. Make more vibrant levels with double jump, one-way platforms and parallax background. You can access this bonus lesson for free on my Godot Code Learn website, link in the description. As always, thanks a lot to my awesome patrons, see you on Godot Code Learn.